The boy's heart stopped at 11:47 p.m. Not slowly, not with warning. 1 second, the monitor showed a jagged fighting line, and the next, it went flat. A single merciless tone filled the room and didn't stop. 7 doctors stood around the bed. 7. The kind of doctors whose names appeared on hospital wings, whose faces had been on magazine covers, whose hands had performed procedures that made medical journals. And every single one of them stood still. Nobody moved toward the child, because they had already tried everything they knew. Wee Ha-jun was standing at the glass wall of the ICU when it happened. He saw the line go flat before he heard the sound. He saw the doctors exchange looks, not the urgent, scrambling looks of people about to act, but the quiet, some exhausted looks of people who had already accepted the outcome and were now trying to figure out who would speak first. His hand pressed against the glass so hard his knuckles turned white. His son was 9 years old. He had survived 3 attempts on his own life. He had built an empire from nothing in a country that hadn't wanted him. He had sat across tables from men who pointed guns at him and felt nothing but calm calculation. And right now, watching the flat line on that monitor, Wee Ha-jun, feared by every criminal organization on the West Coast, could not breathe. "Sir." His head of security, Park Dong-soo, stepped forward. "Sir, they're asking, get them out. They need to get them out of that room." Park hesitated for exactly 1 second, then turned and moved toward the ICU door. Ha-jun didn't watch him go. He was watching his son. Ji-hoon lay on the bed, looking impossibly small. Too small for all the machines attached to him. Too small for the weight of everything his father had tried to do to protect him. The flatline tone was still going. One of the doctors finally moved, an older man, gray-haired, with the quiet authority of someone who had delivered bad news many times. He stepped toward Ha-jun and spoke through the glass intercom. "Mr. Wee." He paused. "We've done everything within our scope. The condition is not responding to any treatment we've attempted. We cannot identify the root cause with certainty. And at this point, continuing intervention may cause more harm than you're telling me to stop." The doctor didn't flinch. "God, I'm telling you, we've reached the limit of what medicine can do here." 7 of the best doctors in the country, and not one of them could tell him why his son was dying. Ha-jun turned away from the glass. He walked down the corridor alone, past the nurses who looked at their clipboards when he passed, past the security detail that followed at a careful distance. He pushed through the heavy hospital doors into the night air, and the rain hit him immediately. Cold, relentless, soaking through his suit jacket in seconds. He didn't move. He stood at the top of the hospital steps and let it come. He hadn't cried since the night his wife died. He wasn't crying now. But there was something happening inside him that he had no word for. Something that felt like the ground beneath a building just before the foundation cracks. That was when he saw her. She was standing at the far edge of the hospital entrance, pressed against the stone column near the gate, watching him. Not with curiosity. Not with the careful non-expression of someone pretending not to stare. She was watching him the way someone watches a fire, like she already knew what it was, and was simply waiting to see if anyone else would notice. She was African, dark-skinned, perhaps in her 50s, with a face that had been through weather and time, and something else that Ha-jun couldn't name. Her clothes were worn through at the knees and elbows. A hospital security guard was already moving toward her, hand raised, clearly about to instruct her to move along for the 3rd or 4th time that night. Ha-jun would have dismissed her completely, except that she wasn't looking at him, and she was looking at the window of the ICU, 4 floors up, and her expression was not the passive curiosity of a bystander. It was recognition. The security guard reached her. "Ma'am, I've already told you twice. You can't loiter here. You need to move on." "I'm not loitering," she said. Her voice was calm and unhurried, with a Nigerian accent that had been softened but not erased by years in America. "I'm waiting." "Waiting for what?" She didn't answer him. She was still looking at the fourth-floor window. Something moved in Ha-Jun's chest. He didn't know what it was. He didn't trust it. But he stood in the rain watching this woman that no one else was paying real attention to, and something made him hold very still. The security guard took her arm. "Ma'am, don't." Ha-Jun's voice carried across the wet pavement. The guard stopped and turned, saw Ha-Jun standing at the top of the steps, and immediately released her arm. The woman finally looked at Ha-Jun. Their eyes met across the distance, through the rain, and she said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Your son is not sick." The guard looked between them. Park Dong-soo appeared at Ha-Jun's shoulder, having followed him out, and his hand moved instinctively toward his jacket. Ha-Jun raised 2 fingers without looking at him, a signal they had used for 15 years. Park went still. "Who are you?" Ha-Jun said. "Someone who knows what your machines cannot measure." He should have walked back inside. Every rational instinct he had, and Ha-Jun operated almost entirely on rational instinct, said this woman was either delusional or running some kind of angle. People ran angles on him constantly. Then he was a wealthy man whose son was visibly dying. There was no shortage of desperate individuals who would show up claiming cures, connections, divine intervention. But Ji-hoon's monitor upstairs had gone flat, and 7 doctors had stepped back. "Come inside," Ha-Jun said. Her name was Amanda Ndidi. That much she gave them in the elevator, standing straight with her worn clothes dripping quietly onto the floor, meeting the eyes of Park Dong-soo and the 2 other security men without the slightest flicker of discomfort. Park was doing what he always did with strangers, cataloging. Height, posture, hands, eyes, looking for the threat assessment. He didn't find what he expected. "How long have you been outside?" Ha-Jun asked. "Oh, since this afternoon." "You've been watching the hospital since this afternoon." "I've been watching the 4th-floor window since this afternoon," she corrected. "I knew someone was fighting in that room. I could feel the resistance." She said it simply, without drama, the way someone says the weather is changing. Park made a sound, not quite a scoff, but close. Amanda glanced at him. "You have a disc problem, lower left. It flares when you stand too long in cold weather, and you've been outside most of this evening." She paused. "I'm correct, aren't I?" Park's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Ha-Jun noticed it. Park almost never shifted. The elevator opened onto the 4th floor. Ha-Jun led her down the corridor and stopped outside the ICU glass. Inside, the nurses had resumed the mechanical protocol, still attempting resuscitation, still following procedure. The flatline had been replaced with a faint, erratic signal, which meant Ji-hoon's heart had restarted in some technical sense, but the machines were doing most of the work. Amanda stood at the glass and looked at the child for a long time. "Tell me about the first episode," she said. 3 months ago, he collapsed at school. Was there a trigger? The doctors asked the same thing. There was nothing unusual about that day. Was it the anniversary of anything? She asked it without turning from the glass. Ha-Jun was quiet for a moment. "My wife passed 2 years ago. The first collapse was 2 years to the day." Amanda closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. No, and he would have been 7 when she died. "Yes." "Did he see it?" The question landed the way a stone lands in still water. The surface broke, and the ripples kept going. Ha-Jun did not answer immediately. He was not a man who paused. He made decisions at a speed that unsettled people. But this question required something from him that wasn't decision-making. "He was in the room," Ha-Jun said finally. He didn't understand what was happening. "Children always understand," Amanda said quietly, "even when they don't have words for it." One of the doctors, The gray-haired one who had spoken to Ha-jun earlier, came out of the ICU and stopped when he saw Amanda. He looked at Ha-jun with the specific expression of a man who is about to be professionally diplomatic while being personally furious. "Mr. Wee, and I understand you're searching for alternatives, but hospital protocol doesn't permit—" "What is his name?" Amanda asked, still looking through the glass. The doctor blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The boy. What is his name?" "That's not—" "Ji-hoon," Ha-jun said. Amanda nodded slightly. She placed her hand flat against the glass. Not dramatically, not like a performance. Just her palm resting there. And the boy on the bed, connected to machines, barely holding on, turned his head. Not toward the doctors, not toward his father. Toward the glass. The gray-haired doctor stared. "That's involuntary response," the younger doctor behind him said quickly. "Neurological. It happens." But Ji-hoon's eyes, half open, glassy, were oriented toward the window, toward Amanda's hand on the glass. And Ha-jun had spent 9 years watching his son's face. He knew every expression it made. That was not involuntary. If you've ever watched someone fight for someone else's child, quietly, without recognition, without even being asked, you know what it costs. Leave a comment. Tell me if that kind of quiet courage moves you the same way it moves me. And if you're new here, this is what we do. We tell the stories that deserve to be told. Don't leave. You need to see what happens next. The gray-haired doctor's name was Dr. Raymond Cho, and he had 40 years of practice behind him. He had seen families in crisis bring in faith healers, herbalists, online specialists with impressive websites and 0 credentials, distant relatives who had once heard of a similar case. He had managed all of them with professional patience because he understood that grief made people reach. But he had never had a homeless woman stop a conversation cold by identifying a specific spinal condition in his colleague without ever being told. He had never had a dying child orient toward a stranger through glass. He was still processing this when Amanda turned from the window and said, "I need to go in." "Absolutely not. Then he will not survive the next episode, and you already know there will be a next episode." Dr. Cho straightened. "Whatever you think you observed just now." "I think I observed a child with a suppressed neurological trauma loop that has been misfiring for 2 years," Amanda said. "I think I observed a body that has been fighting a war no scan can see. And I think I observed 7 trained physicians doing exactly what they were trained to do, which is why none of it is working." The corridor was very quiet. "That is not a medical diagnosis," Dr. Cho said carefully. "No," Amanda agreed. "It's not." Ha-jun looked at the doctor. "What is your medical diagnosis?" A pause. "We have several working theories. What is your confirmed diagnosis?" Another pause, longer this time. "We haven't been able to confirm. Then we are both operating on incomplete information," Ha-jun said. "The difference is that she isn't pretending otherwise." Dr. Cho's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being spoken to this way, and he was not accustomed to losing arguments with men who had never attended medical school. But he was also, underneath the professional architecture, a man who had chosen this career for a reason. And the flat line on that boy's monitor 20 minutes ago was still in his memory. If anything happens to that child," "If anything happens to that child," Ha-jun said, "it will not be because of her." They let her in. She asked for warm water, specific herbs if available. And when no herbs were immediately available, she said it was fine. She would work with what was present. She asked the nurses to reduce the volume on the monitors, not turn them off, just reduce. She asked everyone except Ha-jun to step back at least 10 feet. Dr. Cho stood at the back of the room with his arms folded and his expression controlled, watching. Amanda sat beside Ji-hoon and did not touch him immediately. She simply sat. She breathed slowly and evenly. She looked at the boy's face with the full attention of someone who was not thinking about anything else at all. Ha-Jun watched from near the door, while he had spent 15 years cultivating absolute stillness in dangerous situations. He could sit in negotiations that lasted 12 hours without revealing a single internal state. Right now, that training was the only thing keeping him upright. "Ji-hoon," Amanda said softly. Just his name. No instructions, no urgent tone. Just his name in a voice that treated him like a person instead of a case. The boy's breathing shifted, fractionally, but it shifted. "I know you've been trying to tell them," she said. "I know you drew the things you saw. I know they didn't listen." She paused. "I'm listening." Ha-Jun's throat tightened. He had not known about the drawings. He would later learn, from the notebook the school had kept, from the observations of Ji-hoon's classroom teacher, from a conversation with the child's tutor that Ha-Jun had never had the time for, that his son had been communicating something for months. Patterns, symbols, descriptions of sensations before they happened. A child trying to explain what was happening inside his own body with the only tools available to him. Drawings and questions, and the persistent, careful patience of someone who had not yet learned that adults stopped listening after a certain point. Ha-Jun had not known. He had been managing security contracts and supply chains and territorial negotiations. He had hired the best doctors and the best tutors and the best security. He had provided everything that could be purchased. He had not been in the room, not the way Amanda was in the room now. "That must have been so lonely," Amanda said to Ji-hoon. And somewhere in the far back corner, under all the professional distance and clinical skepticism, Dr. Cho looked away. Park Dong-soo, standing in the doorway, had very carefully become interested in something on the wall beside him. Ha-Jun said nothing, but his hand found the metal railing at the edge of the bed, and he gripped it. There was something wrong with his eyes. He blinked. Amanda's hand came to rest on Ji-hoon's forearm. Not pressing, not moving, just resting. And she began to breathe in a particular rhythm. In through the nose, slow, then out through the mouth. Slower. In, out, deliberate as a metronome. One of the nurses whispered to another. Dr. Cho started to say something. Ji-hoon's breathing changed. It matched. Not perfectly, not immediately, but within 2 minutes, the boy who had been fighting an erratic and struggling pattern on the monitor settled into something that began to approach the rhythm Amanda was breathing. The machine registered it. Dr. Cho went very still. No one spoke. The room itself seemed to be holding its breath. Have you ever had someone in your life dismissed, overlooked, told their gifts weren't real? Who showed up anyway? Who gave their best anyway? I'd love to know if this story is reaching you where you are. Drop something in the comments, even just one word. Those comments tell me what you need more of, and if this kind of storytelling is something you've been looking for, you already know what to do. It was during this silence that Ha-Jun noticed the notebook. Ji-hoon's things had been placed on the small table beside the bed, his shoes, his jacket, a few items from his school bag. So Ha-Jun had seen the notebook before. Dark blue cover, small enough to fit in a child's back pocket. Ji-hoon carried it everywhere. When Ha-Jun had once asked what was in it, Ji-hoon had said, very seriously, "Things adults don't understand yet." Ha-Jun had smiled and said nothing more. He had assumed it was stories, imaginings, the private world of a quiet child. He reached over now and picked it up. He opened it carefully. The way you open something you realize too late you should have opened long before. The first pages were what he expected. Small drawings, geometric shapes, patterns that didn't immediately mean anything. A child's visual language. But as he turned the pages, the patterns became more deliberate, more specific. There were sequences, shapes that repeated in consistent groupings, There were attempts at written description, feeling before the white, and sound inside before it comes, and the color that happens first. Ha-Jun's chest was very tight. His son had been mapping his own episodes, trying to document and predict them, trying to communicate something that the people around him didn't have the framework to receive. He turned to the last written page. Near the top, in Ji-hoon's careful, deliberate child's handwriting. A name. Not a Korean name. Not anyone Ha-Jun knew. Ndidi. Ha-Jun looked up from the notebook. He looked at Amanda, sitting beside his son, breathing slowly in the lamplight of the ICU. He felt the specific, disorienting sensation of a man whose understanding of a situation has just changed shape beneath him. The way the earth moves slightly wrong before something larger is about to happen. "How long has he known your name?" Ha-Jun asked. Amanda didn't look up. "I don't know. I've never met him before tonight." "Then why?" "Sometimes people know things before they know them," she said. "Your son pays very close attention to the world. He noticed something. He followed the thread." She paused. "He is very much like you, I think. He simply shows it differently." Ha-Jun put the notebook down. He stood there with all the information of the past hour rearranging itself into a new shape, and felt something that he almost never allowed. Not confusion, exactly, but its more uncomfortable cousin. The awareness that he had been operating with insufficient data, and that the gap in his data wasn't technical. It was relational. It was the gap between what his son could say and what Ha-Jun had made enough stillness to hear. "No, you knew his mother," Ha-Jun said. It wasn't a question. Amanda was quiet for a moment. The machines kept their slow, steadying rhythm. "Yes," she said. The word landed in the room like a stone into still water, and all the ripples that came after it were going to change the shape of things. Ha-Jun could already feel it. He had survived 15 years in a world that punished weakness by learning never to be unprepared, never to be surprised, never to allow anyone close enough to alter his trajectory. He was not prepared for this. "When?" he said. "A long time ago. Before she came to America. Before she met you." Amanda adjusted her hand slightly on Ji-hoon's arm, keeping the contact gentle and consistent. "We were in the same city in Lagos for 2 years. She was studying. I was practicing. We crossed paths enough times to know each other. She never mentioned you. She had many parts of her life she kept separate. You know that. He did know that. Seo Yaan had been a woman with a complex interiority, private, carefully structured, loving, but layered. He had always respected the parts of her that didn't belong to him. He had also, in the aftermath of her death, spent a certain amount of time wondering whether there were things he hadn't known, hadn't asked, hadn't made room for. "She knew what I did," Amanda continued. "She knew how I worked. She trusted it." A pause. "When she got sick, she asked me to come. But by the time I arrived in Los Angeles, she was already gone." The room was very quiet, except for the monitors and the rain against the window. Ha-Jun said nothing for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was level and controlled, the way it always was. But there was something underneath it. Something he was managing very carefully. "What happened to you?" he asked. "After." Amanda was quiet again. This quiet was different from the others. It was the quiet of someone deciding how much truth to give and in what order. "I had no status here, no visa that lasted, no license that transferred. I had savings that ran out. I had skills that the system here did not have a category for." She exhaled slowly. "So I became invisible, and then I became what you found outside tonight." Ha-Jun absorbed this. He was a man who understood systems. He understood exactly how a person could fall through every gap simultaneously. Wrong documentation, wrong specialization, wrong presentation, Wrong skin in the wrong office on the wrong day. While he had navigated those systems himself from a different angle, he knew they weren't accidents. "You've been in Los Angeles this whole time," he said. "Most of it. For 3 years. 4. He looked at her. This woman in worn-out clothes who had stood in the rain outside his son's hospital for an entire afternoon because she had felt something in a fourth-floor window and had the moral architecture to stay, even when a security guard told her twice to leave. Something he hadn't expected to feel in this room moved through him. Not gratitude. It was too early for gratitude, and Ha-Jun was not a man who rushed toward feeling. It was closer to the particular, uncomfortable recognition of having failed to see something important. He had resources beyond measure. He had a network that reached into every corner of this city. And somewhere in that city, for 4 years, a woman who had known his wife and carried the kind of knowledge that could not be scanned or measured or peer-reviewed had been sleeping outside, while he paid doctors $400 an hour to tell him they didn't know what was wrong with his son. This was not something he could think about right now. He put it away with the precision of a man who had been putting difficult things away for years, and he focused on the room, on his son, on the work that was still happening. Ji-hoon's vitals had stabilized. Not dramatically, not miraculously, but steadily. The erratic lines had smoothed to something that looked, tentatively and carefully, like a child who was sleeping, rather than a child who was dying. Dr. Cho had moved from the back of the room to the middle without announcing the movement. He was watching the monitors with an expression that he was not managing as well as he thought he was. It was the expression of a man who was updating his model of the situation in real time and did not entirely like what the update required. "Vitals are stabilizing," one of the nurses said softly. "I can see that," Dr. Cho said. "Should we just observe?" he said. "Just observe." Amanda spoke without turning around. "He'll need to sleep for at least 6 hours without interruption. No additional medication beyond what's already running. The body needs to do the work it knows how to do. You've just been interrupting it." Silence. "I'm not interrupting," Dr. Cho said, and even as he said it, there was something in his tone that had changed. The professional edge was still there, but something underneath it had gone quieter. "I'm monitoring." "I know the difference," Amanda said, not unkindly. "So do you." Park Dong-soo, still in the doorway, made a sound that was almost certainly not a laugh, and converted it very quickly into a cough. Dr. Cho looked at Park. Park looked at the ceiling. Dr. Cho looked back at Amanda, with the expression of a man who had been in medicine for 40 years and was having a genuinely novel evening. "You said the condition was triggered the night his mother died," Dr. Cho said finally. "Yes. That would make it, at the most clinical level, something in the family of complex trauma response. Psychosomatic in presentation, but physiologically real. Yes. We don't have good treatment protocols for—" "I know," Amanda said. "So that's why 7 of you walked away." Another silence. This one was different from all the others. It was the silence of a man revising. "What you're doing," Dr. Cho said slowly, "is essentially somatic regulation, breathing entrainment, parasympathetic activation." "If that is the language you need," Amanda said, "then yes, that is the language I need," he said, very quietly. "Yes." Ha-Jun looked between them, the doctor in the expensive suit, finding the vocabulary to contain what he was observing, and the woman in worn clothes who had been containing this knowledge alone for years, patiently, without needing anyone to name it for her. And something occurred to him, a thought so clean and sharp it almost felt physical. The knowledge had always existed. The problem had never been the knowledge. The problem had been who was holding it, and what the world had decided they were worth listening to. He was still holding that thought when Ji-hoon opened his eyes. Not the half-glassy, machine-assisted flicker from before. All the way open. Clear. Present. His son's eyes, looking up at the ceiling of the ICU with the quiet, observant intelligence that Ha-Jun recognized immediately. The same look Ji-hoon had worn since he was old enough to have a look. Then Ji-hoon turned his head. Not toward Ha-Jun, not toward the doctors, toward Amanda. And in a voice that was thin and small, but absolutely certain, Ji-hoon said, "I knew you'd come." Amanda looked at the boy for a long moment. Then she smiled, not the wide, performed smile of someone who needed to be seen smiling, but the small, private smile of someone whose expectation had been confirmed. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find the door." Ji-hoon considered this with the seriousness of a child who treated language carefully. "You were outside," he said. "I could feel you outside." "Yes." "For a long time. Since afternoon." He nodded slowly, as if this was reasonable and expected. Then his eyes moved to Ha-Jun, standing at the foot of the bed. Father and son looked at each other, and Ha-Jun felt the specific, disorienting weight of being looked at by someone who loved you, and had also been quietly, patiently disappointed in a way they were too loyal to say out loud. Ji-hoon did not say anything about the notebook. He did not say, "I tried to tell you." He did not say, "I've been writing it down for months, and no one read it." He simply looked at his father with those careful, watchful eyes, and said, "You found her." "She found us," Ha-Jun said. "Same thing," Ji-hoon said, and closed his eyes again. The next 3 hours moved differently than the ones before them. There was still tension in the room. Dr. Cho was not a man built for surrender, and he circled the monitors with the precise attention of someone determined to find the clinical explanation before anyone else could declare the situation unexplainable. The nurses moved in and out. Park Dong-soo remained in the doorway like a piece of architecture that had chosen to become security personnel. Ha-Jun stood and did not sit, because sitting felt like something he had not yet earned. But the room had changed. The particular quality of dread that had been living in it since Ji-hoon's flatline, the compressed, breathless, animal fear of a room that knows it may be about to lose someone, had loosened. Not dissolved, but loosened. The way a rope loosens when the thing pulling against it stops pulling. Amanda worked quietly. She adjusted her breathing sequence twice. She spoke to Ji-hoon in short, low phrases, not narrating what she was doing, not performing for the room, simply communicating with the child as though they were the only two people in it, which, in some meaningful sense, they were. Ha-Jun watched her hands. He had watched many people work under pressure. He had watched surgeons operate, had watched his own men perform under conditions that would have broken most people. He had a developed sense of who had real skill and who was performing skill. Amanda's hands had the quality he associated with people who had done something so many times, it had moved past technique and become instinct, the slight, unremarkable confidence of a person who is not thinking about what they're doing, because thinking about it would only slow them down. Around 2 in the morning, Dr. Cho appeared at his elbow. "His vitals are stable," he said, quietly, as if he wasn't sure he wanted anyone else to hear. "I know," Ha-Jun said. "Whatever she's doing, the physiological impact is real. I want you to understand that I am not endorsing a non-clinical approach, and I will need to document this in a way that— Document it however you need to," Ha-Jun said. Dr. Cho was quiet for a moment. Then, "You should know that what she described, the trauma loop, the somatic presentation, the anniversary response, there is clinical literature on all of it. We simply don't tend to lead with it. The system is designed for problems with visible causes." "I know how systems work," Ha-Jun said. Another pause. "Yes, I imagine you do. Dr. Cho cleared his throat. If the stability holds through the night, we can begin talking about a long-term management approach. It would need to be collaborative. Ha-Jun turned to look at him. Dr. Cho held his gaze with the steadiness of a man who had decided, somewhere in the past 3 hours, to update his professional position rather than defend it. It was not a comfortable decision. It was visible on his face, but he was making it. Collaborative, Ha-Jun repeated. She knows things I don't, Doctor, No-Cho said. It cost him something to say it, but he said it cleanly and without qualification. That's not a position I'm accustomed to being in. I'd prefer to be in it honestly rather than to pretend otherwise. Ha-Jun looked at this man, 60 years old, 40 years of practice, a career built on the architecture of expertise, and felt something that was not quite respect and not quite sympathy, but lived in the neighborhood of both. I'll let her know, Ha-Jun said. Dr. Cho nodded once, turned, walked back to his post at the monitors. Park Dong-soo materialized silently at Ha-Jun's shoulder. The disc thing, he said, very quietly. What? She said I had a disc problem. Lower left. He paused. I've been managing it for 8 months. I haven't told anyone. Ha-Jun looked at him. I'm just saying, Park said, not with the careful tone of a man who does not want to be seen having an opinion, that she is not what I initially assessed. No, Ha-Jun agreed. She's not. Dawn came slowly, the way dawn comes after a night that has demanded too much, reluctantly in thin strips of gray through the window blinds. Ji-hoon slept. The monitors kept their steady lines. Amanda sat in the chair beside the bed and did not sleep. But at some point between 3 and 4 in the morning, her posture shifted from active to something quieter. Present, but resting. Her eyes half open, tracking the room the way a person tracks a room when their body is tired, but their attention is still working. Ha-Jun brought her tea. He'd had to send one of the security men to find a kettle and proper tea bags. The hospital tea was entirely insufficient. And the logistics of this had taken 20 minutes, which was fine because it had given him something to do with his hands. He set the cup on the table beside her without speaking. She looked at it, then at him. Then, thank you. He pulled the other chair to the opposite side of Ji-hoon's bed and sat down, the first time he'd sat all night. He looked at his son's face in the thin morning light, the slight frown that Ji-hoon always wore when he was thinking even in sleep, the way his hand lay open on the blanket, as though waiting to write something down. Tell me about her, Ha-Jun said. He didn't need to say who. Amanda wrapped her hands around the tea. She was quiet for a moment. Not a hesitant quiet, but the quiet of someone choosing where to begin. She was stubborn, Amanda said. Impossibly stubborn. The kind of stubborn that looked like calmness from the outside, so most people didn't realize they were arguing with someone who was never going to change her position. Ha-Jun exhaled through his nose. Yes. She argued with me for 3 weeks about whether emotional memory was stored in the body or only in the mind. She had very strong opinions. She had read every book available and was completely prepared to be wrong, which made her impossible to debate because she'd already thought of every counter-argument before you made it. That's accurate. She made me laugh, Amanda said simply. She had this way of being completely serious about something ridiculous. She'd spend 45 minutes making the philosophical case for why a specific type of mango was superior to all other fruit, with the same energy she brought to everything else. And she'd win. You'd finish the conversation actually convinced. Ha-Jun was looking at the wall. Something had happened to his face, not visibly, but underneath it. A controlled softening, the kind of softening that only happened when the person doing it had spent a long time keeping things in place. She didn't talk about Nigeria, he said. Not much. I always thought it was something she'd chosen to close. She hadn't closed it, Amanda said. She just found it difficult to translate. She said, more than once, that she felt like two people sometimes. The person she was there and the person she had to become here. Not worse or better. Just different shapes. She paused. She loved you. She talked about you with the specific irritation of someone in love with someone whose methods they disagreed with. Ha-Jun turned to look at her. She said you solved every problem by controlling it, Amanda said. And she said, she spent 3 years trying to teach you that some problems don't want to be controlled. They want to be witnessed. The room was very quiet. Ha-Jun looked at his son. She was right, he said. It was 4 words. They cost him something visible to say, and he said them anyway, in the early morning light, in a hospital room that had almost taken everything from him, to a woman his wife had trusted and the world had made invisible. Amanda looked at him carefully. There was something in her expression, not pity, not warmth exactly, but the specific, unclear-eyed recognition of someone watching a person tell the truth and wanting to honor it properly. She knew you'd get there, Amanda said. It shouldn't have taken this. No, Amanda agreed. It shouldn't have. That was all. No comfort that softened it. No reassurance that let him off the hook. Just the truth, accepted between two people who had both, in their different ways, failed to arrive in time for Seo Yeon. If you've ever loved someone and only understood what they needed after the moment had passed, this story is for you. There are people watching this right now who know exactly what that silence feels like. Drop a word in the comments. Just one word, if that's all you have. What we build here is for people who have actually lived something. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the community that holds those stories. Come in. Ji-hoon woke properly at 7:30. He woke the way he always woke. Not gradually, not blinking into consciousness the way most children did, but all at once, like a switch. One moment asleep, the next moment present. His eyes opened, and he looked at the ceiling, and then at his father, and then at Amanda, and his expression moved through 3 distinct phases very quickly. Relief, assessment, and then the specific, satisfied look of a child whose prediction has been confirmed. I knew it would work, he said. Good morning, Ha-Jun said. I told Dr. Yun last month that the medication wasn't finding the right thing, Ji-hoon said. He was already pushing himself up slightly against the pillows, moving carefully but with clear intent. I described it to him exactly. I said it felt like the medicine was looking in the wrong room. He documented that, Dr. Cho said from his corner. He had never gone home. His tie was slightly loosened, which was apparently the closest he came to dishevelment. I reviewed his notes this morning. You did describe it, in those exact words. Ji-hoon looked at Dr. Cho with the polite but evaluating expression he used for adults who were demonstrating competence. Are you going to look in the right room now? Dr. Cho blinked. We are going to try. Ji-hoon considered this. That's better than no, he decided. Park Dong-soo made the not a laugh sound again, slightly less controlled this time. One of the younger nurses turned toward the window. Ha-Jun looked at his son. The precision of him, the seriousness, the careful way he moved through the world, collecting data and drawing conclusions, and felt the particular, uncomfortable pride of a parent who recognizes their own worst traits in their child, while simultaneously being relieved that the child has better judgment about when to use them. Are you in pain? Ha-Jun asked. No, Ji-hoon said. Then more carefully. Less than before. Everything before was like static. Now it's quieter. He looked at Amanda. You made it quieter. Your body made it quieter, Amanda said. I just helped it remember how. Ji-hoon thought about this with the focused attention he brought to things that interested him. Like tuning, he said. Exactly like tuning. Appa never tunes things, Ji-hoon said, in a tone so perfectly neutral that it was devastating. He replaces them. Ha-jun felt this land. He did not look away from it. Yes, he said. I know. Ji-hoon looked at his father for a moment, the same careful adult look that had always unsettled Ha-jun slightly, the look of a child who understood more than children were supposed to understand. It's okay, Ji-hoon said. You came this time. 3 words, carrying everything. Ha-jun's hand found his son's, and he held it without speaking, and Ji-hoon let him, and that was enough. The morning unfolded with a speed that was particular to Aftermath, the specific, slightly unreal velocity of time after a crisis, when the world resumes its ordinary rhythm and everyone involved has to decide how to step back into it. Dr. Cho requested a formal consultation with Amanda. He said it with the precise language of professional protocol, which was his way of making a decision that was personally significant, feel manageable. Amanda said yes. She said it simply, without making him feel the cost of having to ask. Ha-jun observed this and thought that his wife had been right, that there were people in the world who had the specific, rare intelligence of knowing when not to make something harder for someone. Park Dong-soo pulled Ha-jun into the corridor at 9 o'clock. I ran background, he said, quietly, the tone he used for information that required handling. And? Her name checks out. Nigerian passport, expired. She came in on a student visa attached to a traditional medicine research program at a university that closed its program 4 years ago when the grant funding ended. She had no pathway to status after that. She filed twice for extension. I was denied both times. He paused. No criminal record. Nothing. She's been connected to 2 free clinics that operated in Compton and South Central, both of which cited her by name in their operational notes, which is how I found her. People she helped. He looked at Ha-jun. There's documentation. The outcomes are notable. How notable? Notable enough that one of the clinic directors wrote a formal letter to 3 separate medical institutions, requesting that her practice be formally reviewed and licensed. All 3 declined to respond. He paused again, in the careful way that meant he had a personal observation he was choosing whether to make. She's not a con artist, boss. She's someone the system discarded because it didn't have a shelf for her. Ha-jun looked at the closed ICU door. He was thinking about his wife, who had also been someone the system here struggled to categorize, who had also arrived speaking a different language, not of words, but of understanding, of approach, of priority, and had spent years quietly translating herself into forms the world around her could process. He was thinking about the letter Amanda had never received from Seo Yeon in time. He was thinking about a boy who had written a name in a notebook and been patient enough, in the way of a child who has learned that patience is the only tool available to him, to wait for the world to catch up. Fix her status, Ha-jun said. Park looked at him. That will take time, and I know what it will take. And the licensing, find out what she needs, and make sure she has access to it. He turned to look at Park directly. Whatever the process requires, whatever it costs, I'll make it happen. Park nodded once. He did not say anything further because he had worked for Ha-jun long enough to know when a decision had been made in the part of him that didn't revisit things. And find her somewhere to stay, Ha-jun added. Somewhere appropriate? I'll arrange it. Today. Park nodded and moved away down the corridor, already reaching for his phone. Ha-jun stood alone in the hallway for a moment. The hospital was waking up around him, the daytime shift arriving, the sounds of the building resuming its ordinary operation, trolleys and footsteps, and the distant intercom. Ordinary life continuing. The world that had no idea what had happened in the room at the end of this corridor. He had built everything he had by understanding leverage, the precise point where the right pressure would move the right thing. He had applied that understanding to territory and capital and people and conflict for 15 years, with a consistency that had made him, in his world, close to untouchable. He had not thought to apply it to the quiet, careful architecture of his son's inner life. He had provided resources and protection and every material advantage. He had not provided his attention in the particular, patient form that attention sometimes needed to take. Not directing, not solving, not replacing broken things with better ones, but simply sitting in the room long enough to hear what was trying to be said. Seo Yeon had told him. He had been listening, but not in the right room. He was in the right room now. He pushed the ICU door open and went back to his son. By midday, Ji-hoon had eaten. A modest amount, but eaten. He had asked for his notebook, which Ha-jun brought without comment, and watched his son open to a fresh page and immediately begin writing something. When Ha-jun leaned slightly to see, Ji-hoon angled the notebook away with the automatic, unbothered privacy of someone who had been keeping his own counsel for a long time. Ha-jun did not push. It was a small thing, and also not a small thing. Amanda had been given a proper room by the hospital, at Ha-jun's instruction. Not a patient room, but a staff consultation space with a bed and a window, because she had been awake for more than 30 hours, and even remarkable people needed sleep. She had accepted this without ceremony, which Ha-jun was beginning to understand was her consistent register. She received things as they came, without performance of either gratitude or resistance. Doctor. Cho had spent the morning reviewing every piece of documentation from Ji-hoon's case with what appeared to be the focused urgency of a man settling an argument with himself. His junior colleagues gave him a wide berth. The nurses, who had watched the night unfold from closer range than anyone, moved with a quiet efficiency that suggested they had made their own assessments and would be processing them for some time. Just before noon, Ji-hoon set down his notebook and looked at his father. "Are you going to fix it?" he asked. Ha-jun looked up from the window. "Fix what?" "Everything you broke by not paying attention," Ji-hoon said. Not with anger, not with accusation. With the flat, clear practicality of a child who has thought something through and is now stating his conclusions. Ha-jun sat with this for a moment. Outside the window, Los Angeles was doing what it always did, moving, dense, and indifferent, producing its ordinary, complicated life at full volume. Cars and sun and the vast machinery of a city that had no idea it was in the same zip code as this room. "I'm going to try," Ha-jun said. Ji-hoon absorbed this. Trying is enough, he decided, as long as it's real trying, not the kind where you send someone else. Ha-jun looked at his son, 9 years old, with his mother's precision and his father's architecture, and something entirely his own that neither of them had generated, some specific, individual intelligence that belonged only to Ji-hoon, and felt the weight of the year ahead of him differently than he had felt any weight in 15 years. Not the weight of threat, not the weight of calculation, saw the weight of a relationship that needed repair and had, against significant odds, survived long enough for the repair to begin. "Not the kind where I send someone else," Ha-jun confirmed. Ji-hoon picked up his notebook again, but before he opened it, he said, "She knew Yama." "Yes. That's not a coincidence." "No," Ha-jun agreed. "I don't think it is." Ji-hoon opened his notebook. He wrote something. Then he looked up one more time and said, "Don't let her disappear again," in the same tone he might use to remind someone to carry an umbrella. Ha-jun looked at his son. "I won't," he said. Ji-hoon nodded once, satisfied, and returned to his writing. Ha-jun left the hospital at 2 in the afternoon, for the first time since the previous evening. Not because the crisis had passed. Crises, in his experience, did not pass so much as transform, but because there was work that needed to be done, and he could not do it from a hospital chair. He sat in the back of the car and did not look at his phone for the first 15 minutes, which was unusual enough that the driver checked the rearview mirror twice to confirm he was still present. Ha-jun was thinking about his wife. He was thinking about her in a way he rarely allowed himself, not the managed, contained form of memory that he had developed in the 2 years since her death, the kind that let you access the fact of someone without the full weight of them, but the real thing, the full weight. Seo Yeon in the kitchen on a Sunday morning with her tea and her book and her absolute refusal to start a conversation before 9:30. Seo Yeon in a boardroom once, when he had brought her to a meeting she hadn't asked to attend, and she had sat quietly through the entire thing, and then on the drive home said, with surgical precision, exactly what every person in that room had actually wanted, and why none of them had said it. Seo Yeon at Ji-hoon's bedside after he was born, holding him with the specific, stunned attention of someone who has just encountered something they had no framework for yet. Seo Yeon telling him in the last year of her life, "You run toward things you can control and away from things you can't. And one day, something you can't control is going to be the most important thing, and you will not know how to be still for it." He had told her she was wrong. He was not often wrong, but he had been wrong about this. The car moved through the city, and Ha-jun watched it through the window. This place he had claimed and built in and made into his territory. This enormous, indifferent machine of a city that had eaten people like Amanda and Didi and processed them through its systems and deposited them outside hospital gates in worn-out clothes and simply continued moving. He had resources that could alter trajectories. He had used them strategically for years to consolidate power, to protect his network, to maintain the precise balance of leverage and obligation that kept his world intact. He had never once thought to use them for the kind of problem that didn't come with a territorial advantage attached. Something Seo Yeon had also said, once, when she was tired, and he had pushed back on something she'd asked him to do. "You're not actually protecting things, Ha-jun. No, you're just controlling them until they break." He pulled out his phone and called Park. "The clinic network," he said. "The two she was connected to in Compton and South Central. Find out what they need. Funding, space, whatever it is. And find out if there are more." Park was quiet for exactly the length of time it took him to recalibrate the parameters of the conversation. More clinics? More people like Amanda. People with real practice, no pathway. Find out how many there are and what the barriers are. Another pause. "Boss, that's a significant. I know what it is," Ha-jun said. "Start with her network and work outward. I want to know the shape of it within the week." "Understood." Park paused once more. "The legitimate infrastructure side. That's going to require some distancing from the other operations. People will ask questions about the funding source. Then we build it clean," Ha-jun said. "From the ground up. Separate structure. Whatever it needs to be legitimate." He watched the city move past the window. "I have lawyers. Use them for something that deserves them." He ended the call. The driver, who had been with him for 6 years and had long since learned to be invisible in the car, did not say anything. But Ha-jun noticed, in the rear view, the slight involuntary softening of the man's expression before he returned to professional neutrality. Ha-jun looked back out the window. He was thinking about his son, writing in his notebook with the contained, serious energy of a child who had survived something and was already documenting what it taught him. He was thinking about Amanda, so asleep in a hospital room that was the first safe place she had slept in years, carrying a gift the world had no license for and had therefore decided to discard. He was thinking about Seo Yeon, who had known both of them, had moved between a mafia boss and a healer, and a medical system, and a new country, with her particular tireless intelligence, trying to build something out of pieces that weren't designed to connect, and who had not lived long enough to see what happened when all three finally arrived in the same room. And he was thinking about a boy who had written a name in a notebook and waited, who had known in the way that children know things when no one has taught them not to, that the answer was somewhere in the city, that it would come, that it was worth waiting for. This is the moment in the story that stays with you, not the flat line, not the healing. This, a man in the back of a car, alone with the truth of what he missed and what he still has time to do differently. That moment lives in all of us. If you've reached the end of this story and something in you shifted, don't let it sit quietly. Tell me what it stirred. Tell me what it reminded you of. The comment section of this channel belongs to people who feel things deeply and aren't afraid to say so. That's you. You've proven it by staying until the end. Subscribe if you want to stay in this space, not because of a number, but because stories like this one are what we're building here, one at a time, for people who are ready to receive them. Ji-hoon knew Amanda would come. I think you knew this story was waiting for you too.